when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous, but no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move. This picture tells how the mass migration was accomplished.
Concentration camps were for political enemies, and we were political enemies. We had the face of the enemy. Could I describe my rage? I guess it's because I've, in many ways, put it aside now. The tears don't come as easily as it did when I was trying to deal with my sadness, the shame, the anger. And if you talk to a lot of the children of the camps, it affected their whole life. At least it did for me. And I didn't know who I was, where I belonged. Poston put me on a journey to try to help me understand my place here in this country. My older brother was 2 years old, and I was just 11 months when we got on a ship. It took 2 weeks to get here to the U.S. My father wanted to leave Japan because the military was building. And of course, by 1937 or the mid-30s, Japan was at war with China. When the invitation came for him to be a missionary to the Japanese-speaking congregation here, he decided to come. My mother tried desperately to teach us Japanese, but shortly after that the war broke out, and we just refused to learn any more Japanese. I wanted to be like other people.
That Sunday, we were all home. I don't think the radio was working. We were just working on the farm, burning bushes, having a great time, and we had no idea all this had happened. Then I went to school the following Monday, and I just couldn't understand it. None of my friends were talking with me.
I remember my father, he had a suitcase all packed, was by the door, and he was waiting for the FBI to pick him up. And I thought that that was just something I had imagined as a child, until I saw in my father's file, the War Relocation Authority files, the FBI was investigating my dad because they thought he was a Buddhist priest. And as soon as they discovered he was a Christian minister, they decided to close the case.
So many people were picked up for having a flashlight or having a dead car battery or having something. But in our case, these agents ransacked the whole place under the mattresses, my mattresses, found my diary and read that. Before the agents left, they got in a huddle and then they left, and one of the agents patted my mother on the head and said, "Good Christian family." I was so totally humiliated when those things went up. That's me. Notice to all those of Japanese ancestry in great big print. I didn't want to read them. I didn't. And I passed up one and I passed up another one, and down that short little routier road of about a mile, there must have been about 6, 7 of those notices nailed on the fence posts. But my father had read them, and he knew exactly what had to be done. 10 days. And the three of us didn't sleep, practically. Only just when we got tired, we slept, and we just worked around the clock. My parents out in the field trying to get in as much crop as possible. When we had enough money, we ordered clothes from Montgomery Ward for the kids.
The soldiers came, they were young men with rifles and bayonets, and I remember looking at that bayonet and just being terrified. And they marched my 2 brothers and I to the truck, and we got on it, and it just had 2 benches on each side with the canvas over it. I have memories of sitting there scared to death because I was afraid I was going to fall off the bench.
We didn't talk about all this with the children because we felt that they need to be, my mother said, happy and secure. They don't need all this stuff. So at night, late at night, the 3 of us would plan what to do. So I was trying to get the kids ready for what we called the trip. And they were so excited about going someplace. Have you seen that movie, Life is Beautiful? It's kind of like that. That reminded me so much of what happened to us. The boy didn't know, he thought it was a game. And we tried to make it that way during the whole experience.
My father had this huge idealistic notion that even his sons could become president of the United States. I mean, he had this idealized image of what America was all about. And then when, after 5 years, we end up in a concentration camp, it just blew holes in his idealism.
Evacuation. More than 100,000 men, women, and children, all of Japanese ancestry, removed from their homes in the Pacific Coast states to wartime communities established in out-of-the-way places. Their evacuation did not imply individual disloyalty, but was ordered to reduce a military hazard at a time when danger of invasion was great. 2/3 of the evacuees are American citizens by right of birth. The rest are their Japanese-born parents and grandparents. The people are not under suspicion. They are not prisoners. They are not internees. They are merely dislocated people, the unwounded casualties of war. The time, spring and summer of 1942. The place, 10 different relocation centers in unsettled parts of California, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, and Arkansas.
we got onto the train, they told us to pull the shades down if the shades weren't already down. They didn't want us to look out the window. They weren't going to tell us where we were going, and that is something I can't understand.
Until the very last minute, I thought, well, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. The president's going to realize this is also wrong, and he's going to send that wire. But when that train moved away, my whole world just collapsed.
We rode the train for hours, and it finally started to slow down. And when it finally came to a stop, it was at a place called Parker. And I remember seeing this vast desert, and there was a dust storm with huge tumbleweeds just flying all over. We were told to get off of the train, and alongside the highway there were these open-back army trucks. So they told us to get on the army trucks. How in the world do we get on these trucks? There's no cover. But reluctantly, we did as we were instructed and got onto the trucks and loaded our belongings. And then we took off for our destination. And I can remember being in the back of the truck. The sun was hot. It was just beating down on my head, and the wind was blowing. The dust was just so thick. The tumbleweeds were flying, and I had to hold a handkerchief to my nose and my mouth so that I could breathe. And I had to hold on to the side of the truck with one hand, or else I probably might have been, thrown out of the truck. And I looked over to see my poor mother. She was just hanging on tightly to the baby. After a while, I could see rows and rows of black tar-covered army barracks. And so I figured, well, this must be where we're going. And the trucks slowed down. And yes, it was our destination. The truck came to a stop, and we were told we were at the Colorado River Relocation Center. And there was barbed wire around it, and military police with guns. And they had their guns pointed at us. And some of them were shaking, just as much as we were shaking. And I thought to myself, how could I, a citizen of America, be put in a place like this?
There was this great big sign that said Poston Indian Reservation. And I said, goody, goody, we're guests on an Indian reservation. And I had studied in history that the Indians had hunting grounds and rivers to fish in and all that. And then after miles and miles, I realized that we were right in the reservation. Nothing but sagebrush and sand. And I thought, well, maybe if they could live here, maybe we could too.
Then we were told to get off the trucks, and my brothers were crying. Their faces were full of dust, and I was trying to wipe the dust off their faces. And we were ushered into a barrack where there were a few people sitting behind typewriters. They were going to register us. I was the oldest, and my mother didn't speak fluent English. I was going to be the spokesperson for the family. And it took quite a while to give all the answers. They wanted to know our name and where we were from and birth date, etc., religion. And they told my brother to fill 7 mattress covers with straw. That was going to be used on our beds. So he went to fill the mattress covers with straw, and then I was taken to the housing unit where we were assigned 2 barracks because we had such a large family. And then someone took us over to the apartment. And as we got to the barrack, I opened the door, and I couldn't believe what I saw. There was dust coming up from the floor, just coming up from the floor. And there was nothing in this room but an oil stove in the corner. So my mother and I looked at each other, and we just both fell to the floor, and we cried. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't imagine how we could survive in a place like this when we had absolutely nothing.
Naturally, the newcomers looked about with some curiosity. They were in a new area, on land that was raw, untamed, but full of opportunity. Here they would build schools, educate their children, reclaim the desert. Their own physicians took precautions to guard against epidemics. They opened advanced Americanization classes for college students, who in turn would instruct other groups. They made a rough beginning at self-government, for while the Army would guard the outer limits of each area, community life and security within were largely up to the Japanese themselves. They immediately saw the need for developing civic leaders. At weekly community meetings, citations were given to the block leaders who had worked most diligently. Special emphasis was put on the health and care of these American children of Japanese descent.
I felt lost in the desert in terms of our future. We had no, we had the present, but we didn't have the future. We had nothing to look forward to. There was all kind of rumors going around as to what was going to happen to us. And I think one of the biggest rumor was that we were going to be traded off as a prisoner of war exchange. Whereas the second rumor was we were going to stay there until infinity, until we just died out there in that prison, out there in nowhere. So that was our future, just to live out in that environment devoid of everything, surrounded by barbed wire fence and sentry posts. We suddenly became an enemy alien. The fact that we were going to live out there in that bleak environment forever.
My father would tell stories. My father was full of stories. He read Victor Hugo and told us chapter by chapter the stories, and he would tell us samurai stories, and he would tell us some Longfellow, Hiawatha, haiku. We would hear his own haikus and some classic haikus, and all these things when we were growing up. And then in camp, you know, he stopped doing that, but I remember when we were all lying outside, he'd say, now, who can spot the Mitsuboshi? That's the three sisters, the three stars. You know, we always did that at the farm. And it kind of gave you a feeling of connectedness. Those three stars are at the farm, at home. Three stars are right up there. You know. But then I'd think, I wonder if there's anybody out there trying to get us out of here. And then I thought, I wonder if we're going to just dry up here and nobody will know the difference.
A caravan of Japanese-owned trucks and pleasure cars heads inland from the Pacific. Aliens ordered out of strategic coastal zones, they are allowed all the personal belongings and household goods they can carry. Escorted by troopers, they go to make their homes under Uncle Sam's surveillance for the duration.
The weather was so bad, the water was so bad, everything was just terrible. Everybody was sick with diarrhea and sick with, just name it. We had to take a lot of salt pills, and there was a lot of physical suffering that's going on, plus a lot of people were also suffering emotionally and mentally. One of my best friends came to the hospital and we had to hold him down because he turned out to become manic depressive.
The first year was just absolutely unlivable. Well, I don't know what hell is like, but it was a nightmare. The food was terrible. We had a cook assigned, but I don't think he was really a cook because in the hometown, he was a laundryman.
The psychological transition that the adults had to go through must have been horrific. We lived in regular houses. We had running water, we had washing machines, we had a kitchen, a bathroom, a bedroom, a living room. And all of a sudden they go in this camp into this one room. The only thing you had were the cots. And then you had to go eat your meals in a mess hall and stand in line to get your meals, like the military.
Everything came to a standstill. My parents were just getting their feet on the ground and everything was taken from them. And they were never able to buy a home after that. They had to rely on their children to take care of them after the war.
My father used to talk about the bamboo and how it sways in the wind, it never breaks. He used to talk about the river that will go around the rocks. And I think that was the kind of philosophy that they had. Kodomo no tameni means for the sake of the children. That was foremost. And when we went to camp, it was a safe society for the children. And my brothers and sisters had a good time. They had nothing to worry about. They ate 3 times a day, played with their friends.
There was some kind of spark there that kept us going. I don't know where it was, but we all kept a faith. But we were very young, and when you're very young, like I was only just barely 18. I was in my prime. I could really take all of that abuse.
It was up to the individual to make life worthwhile. I just made up my mind I was going to do the best I could and make life as livable as possible.
Our parents just said, we have to work, and that really saved our lives, I think. Yeah, we had something to do out there in the desert. We all had a job. We all worked an 8-hour day, but at least we had something to do. And I think that saved us.
We were so busy doing things. We kept ourselves busy doing things. I was hired on as a nursery school attendant. I tell myself that's where your career started, right there in Poston, Camp 2.
I was assigned to the registration desk to register the incoming evacuees. There must have been at least 10 of us. Busloads and truckloads of evacuees came in. And when that finished, then I was assigned to another job as a secretary in the public health department.
For once, I felt that I had no discrimination against me. I was surrounded by my own kind. No one's going to be looking at me, calling me names. I don't have to do any kind of fighting or retaliating to people when they say things to me. I didn't have to worry about being refused at a counter, at a malt shop, for example, or at a theater. I felt that all that onus was taken off my back once and for all, and now I was living amongst my own kind in this desert environment.
Every morning I used to walk around the compound and the kids would follow me. I had a following. I felt like Pied Piper. There was this one area where a whole crowd of people were there. I said, uh-oh, somebody must have died. You know, I thought, what would you do when somebody dies in a place like this? I said, well, the kids don't have to see this. So I directed them away from the crowd. And then people were turning around and coming back with a big smile on their faces. So I went back to see, and you know what it was? It was a little plant coming up. Just a little green 2-leaf plant coming up. The first one in this whole camp. And every day people would go and watch how much it's grown. It was just a a morning glory plant. And finally climbed up, and everybody planted things. And pretty soon the barracks, you couldn't tell the barracks because the morning glory plants were climbing all over, and flowers were blooming in between the barracks.
I had been courted by Paul Higashi, who suddenly said to me, what are your plans? Are you going to marry me or not? We had a beautiful wedding, May the 23rd. It was unbelievable what a person can do. He had all my brothers and his brothers and their friends go to the Colorado River. They chopped the leafy branches from the side of the river, I should say. Brought them back, stood them up in the church hall, and his mother made beautiful paper flowers, which they inserted within the branches and made a beautiful garden setting. And we had a 7 o'clock wedding. We all got dressed up. As I walked down the aisle with my father, the bouquet I had to be paper. I didn't have a real flower for a bridal bouquet, but that was okay. But I laughed as I walked down the aisle because I could hear the paper just rustling because I was so nervous. Then after the wedding, we had a reception in the mess hall, and the entire block was invited. For the reception, my husband bought me a gardenia corsage, which I couldn't believe, a real flower. So whenever I see a gardenia to this day, it reminds me of my wedding day.
Now, this brief picture is actually the prologue to a story that is yet to be told. The full story will begin to unfold when the raw lands of the desert turn green, when all adult hands are at productive work on public lands or in private employment. It will be fully told only when circumstances permit the loyal American citizens once again to enjoy the freedom we in this country cherish, and when the disloyal, we hope, have left this country for good. In the meantime, we are setting a standard for the rest of the world in the treatment of people who may have loyalties to an enemy nation. We are protecting ourselves without violating the principles of Christian decency. And we won't change this fundamental decency no matter what our enemies do. But of course, we hope most earnestly that our example will influence the Axis powers in their treatment of Americans who fall into their hands.
The ban was lifted. My parents decided that they would send me back to Sacramento to check the farm out. I was scared coming back. We heard about houses being burnt down, and the climate was really pretty scary. But I came back, there was nothing left there. It had been totally vandalized. The whole area was a disaster. Mama's garden was just beautiful with flowers, had all been buried under with trash and beds and car parts and bottles and newspapers. I opened the door and the screen door flapped down on me, and then I heard voices inside. I said, oh no. My heart just sank. Now what am I gonna do? Do I just quietly leave? But I knocked on the door, and all these little children came to the door. Mama, somebody's at the door. So I had to tell her that we were coming back and we would like for her to find another place to stay.
It was very hard readjusting. I was chased and spit at, and rocks were thrown at me. My dad, he had to not only be a minister to a congregation that was trying to resettle into their homes, but he had to go out and make a living as a gardener, scrape up equipment in a car and go out trying to find customers so that we could eat. My father used to have nightmares, and he'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming, you know, those of you who could speak English, why don't you do something? They can't do this to us.
You don't dwell on the bad things. Things just kind of go away, although it was wrong. And we were later told it was wrong. It doesn't make up for what we did go through, and that will be a portion of my life that I will never forget. But life goes on. Despite what happened in Poston, we did the best we could. Then I got married, and I had a good, loving husband. My children were good children. What more can I ask? Well, I've had a happy life. After the war, I've had a happy life.
The United States today officially recognized a grave mistake in its history, the forced relocation of Japanese Americans during World War II. President Reagan signed a bill providing $1.2 billion in compensation.
Today, the government apologized and agreed to pay $20,000 tax-free to each of the 62,000 survivors. But the president said no payment can make up for those lost years.
So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here, we admit a wrong.
I just wish that my mother could have been here to experience this today, because she suffered quite a bit.
I'm sure happy it ended this way.
Susumu Umori and his family are giving their money, $120,000, to charity. To them and other survivors, what matters most is regaining a sense of honor.
The ceremonies today made me feel that for the first time in the past 46 years that I was an American like the rest of the people.
Thank you all again, and God bless you all. I think this is a fine day.
Hello? Ah, very good, you are alive. How many of you are from Topaz? Margie, stand up. Oh, Margie. Poston 1. We are there to meet each other. We've been through the same thing, and it's a certain friendship that you formed. There's a connection amongst all of us. It's interesting that we don't talk about those difficult times when we get together. You don't dwell on the hardships.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for waiting. 皆様、こんばんは。どうもお待たせいたしました。Today is September 17, 2006. Congratulations. We are all here at the Mote Camp to get together with Amachi, Colorado, Poston, Arizona, Topaz, Utah, and Tule Lake, and a lot of other camps are here too. So such a wonderful thing to get together.
You're waiting up forever, counting every mile of railroad track. They tell you lies. Never dawn, my heart begins to yearn. Why I decide to roam? Gotta take a sentimental journey. Sentimental journey home.
Okay, thank you very much.
You are who you are because of all these experiences that piled up. It's hard to overcome, even in adulthood. You know, you keep looking for solutions.
I got this strong inferior feeling, and that inferior feeling still exists today. And I wanted to become an American. All of us wanted to become Americans. We tried everything to become Americans. We You know, we adopted everything. America is apple pie. If it wasn't for my face, I know I would have been able to make out just like anybody else.
Well, I think the internment will stay with me the rest of my life. Certainly, I think about it now and think, how could it have happened? You know, I was born in America. How come they didn't just intern our parents? Why did they have to take the children too? It's hard to express what could have been. I didn't get to attend my graduation. That was something that I looked forward to. Those were the fun days, and life was just beginning for me. So I think I missed out on a lot. I don't know what kind of life I would have had, but probably would have been better than being in an internment camp.
And I really felt misplaced, and so I didn't know who I was. In fact, even to today, I don't know who I am. I don't know where I belong. I don't know what I am. I think I'm American, but I'm constantly reminded that I'm not.
Here I am, 83, and still having to talk about it. In so many cases, I think we feel that we're not fully acceptable into the ordinary society. We still struggle. We are forever on the alert, I think, for the negative that may come attacking us, maybe. Yeah. It was such a traumatic thing that happened. I mean, you were totally unwanted, totally unwanted. Your country, your own country doesn't want you, and you put away. You know, I don't know how else to explain it. You tell a child that he's no good, or you're retarded, or things like that, and that will be stamped forever in that child's mind. And it's the same thing that's happened to a lot of us. See, we've been told that we are not good enough, and you don't belong here. You know?
I went to college and got my degrees, and I paid the dues, and I felt I could keep up with anybody, but inside, I'm really a person that has no real confidence to operate in this country. It's sad because wherever I go, it seems that there's a block put up. And where we first bought our home, and we were living there for a couple of months when we found out that people in that neighborhood had taken up a petition to keep us out. All these things just adds up to make you feel that you're not one of them. You're not an American. How could you feel that you're an American when even little kids ask me, what are you, you know?
Well, life is what it is, you know. You were taught that this was a democratic country, and, you know, but it isn't. So it makes you wonder sometimes. I know no other country but America. So where would I go?
I'm very leery about going into a barber shop or going into a restaurant or a hotel. Anytime there's some kind of a problem, I think it's because I'm Japanese. I just can't stand it. I hope to die soon now, but I'm going to die not having to encounter that kind of experience again. I just avoid it like crazy.
In your mind, you probably think, I'm born American citizen, period. You don't have to prove anything. My 5 brothers and I, you know, 6 of us served in the Army. And I volunteered during the Korean conflict. This is my country. I'm going to give it what I think I should, and I'm glad I did it. My name is Kiyosato Nunley. I'm here today to tell you about my experiences during World War II. And I was incarcerated in one of the 10 concentration camps in America, which housed 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry. I'm here today because I don't want to see something like this happening to anybody else. These kids are studying history. They need to know what happened so that they can weigh and make their own decisions. It needs to be a part of every student's history lesson, and it isn't. I suppose they haven't given any thought, like I did at that age, to what it is not to be free. I tell the students, when I was your age, I didn't think about my citizenship. I just took it for granted. But when that was taken away from you, then you fought hard. You fought hard, you know, you tried to prove that I am as American as anybody else.
I really believe that the solution is through intermarrying. Many of the women in our family are married, what we call married out. And my grandkids are all white, half white and half Japanese. So the kids now have a chance. I think this whole thing is going to be wiped out in another couple of generations. This problem that I'm faced with, this racial prejudice and the inferiority feeling that comes because of that, will be wiped out. I don't think there'll be any American with Japanese blood walking around and feeling so inferior.
Every time I would see the flag, I would hear some songs that reminded me of Poston. I would cry, and it was a feeling that I tried to keep down, but it just would come out. And when I started to realize that I had these feelings, I started asking, what in the world is going on? It was the issue of identity, and here we were going through an educational system that taught us about justice and freedom for all and civil rights and all of these things, and I couldn't put that together with what we had actually experienced. You know, it was like, it didn't make sense to my young mind, and I think that's gradually, as I studied more about American history, it just finally started to boil to a point where I was really angry. Angry because there was nothing in the history books about what happened. And gradually, I think that's how my rage began to surface. Art became a means to probe for me. So I took a drawing class, and the assignment was to take a watercolor paper, dip it in water, and then stretch it out on the table and just throw some watercolors at it and see what would emerge. When I did that, I saw two heads, a side profile of two heads. And I thought, oh, that doesn't make any sense. So I crumpled up the paper and started over again. And the same image came up again. The one face on one side was that of a young child. The other side was that of an adult. And so I just kept pushing it, and I put the flag over the mouth of the adult, and it went over the eye on the other side of the adult. So the child had the flag over its eyes. I thought as I was doing that as a child I couldn't see nor understand much of anything, or didn't understand anything. But as an adult, as I began to dwell on it, I realized I couldn't talk about it. For almost 60 years, I had carried this feeling of anger and betrayal and emotional feelings that I couldn't describe. I was conscious of the anger I had about the camps, so I wanted to deal with it. I was tired of carrying around the anger. and was getting older, and I wanted to just feel relieved of that anger. Since the camp experience was such an important part of my identity, I wanted to find out what had happened, how it happened, how it came about. How was it that the government decided to do this to the Japanese Americans? What was going on during that period that the government would so callously take infants even to this desolate place? And that's what put me on the journey of looking into Poston, how it came to be. My research on Poston led me to places that I never expected. I discovered that the history of the Colorado River Indian tribes played a huge role as to why we ended up in Poston.
The history of the Poston internment camp for the Japanese is fairly complex in that it didn't happen just as a result of World War II. What came with it was part of a longer process of what was going on here in the Southwest in general.
There was a different purpose for Poston besides just being an internment camp. I think the first discovery that absolutely startled me was finding out that the Office of Indian Affairs was in charge of running the Poston camp, along with the War Relocation Authority, who ran the 9 other internment camps. The government and the Bureau of Indian Affairs used us for their ends, for their plans, and we were pawns in the hands of the 2 governmental agencies.
The placement of the Poston internment camp here was really done without the knowledge of the local tribal government. It was mostly an agreement between the superintendent for the Indian agency here and the central office in Washington.
The government had been trying for decades to bring water from the Colorado River to the reservation.
John Collier, who was a commissioner of Indian Affairs under Franklin Roosevelt, was very interested in developing this area. But the problem for this reservation was that there were not enough people to justify a federal expenditure for the irrigation project. The Japanese internment was the justification needed for the expenditure of federal funds that created the infrastructure which he built upon in order to implement his vision of larger Indian colonization.
Commissioner John Collier was wise to take advantage of an opportunity. The War Department was looking for desolate places, and here was a reservation that was desolate. Now was an opportunity for the Office of Indian Affairs to develop that southern area of the camp, and they did it. And what better opportunity than to have free confined laborers in Poston? And that's what Commissioner Collier figured would be the best way to fulfill a project that he had been working on for years.
Our country is here. Colorado River Indian Tribal Reservation, that's my country. When I think about the United States, I'm not thinking about Arizona, Montana, or anything. I'm thinking about Colorado River Indian Reservation. We were from all the way up to almost to Hopi, to northern Arizona, all the way to California. We had runners, we had traders that traded the seashells from the coast to the Hopis and Navajos and Pueblos. Now we're confined to this 244,000 acres. When I grew up in American history that I studied at the grade school, high school, even the college level, the total Native American history from the U.S. history class that we attended was 1 paragraph long. So that summed up our whole existence for all tribes in the United States. And generally it talked about how the Europeans arrived in the East and about Thanksgiving and about how they fought the Sioux and how the Apaches were almost the last group to end the battle, and that was it. There was no mention about Mojaves, Kickapoos, Chimoeris. It's just about 5 or 6 tribes were named. That was the American history version that was taught in the school systems in this country when I was growing up. which generally meant that we didn't exist. We never saw how we existed in this country. And in fact, as I grew up in this country, we were always categorized as other. Every tribe has a story. We can identify it with mass relocation against our will. The whole idea of an internment camp within an internment camp, that the reservations at one point in time were actually like places where they kept you and you couldn't go leave the reservation without permission. In fact, that's how they were all established. To see another ethnic group brought and lodged there against their will was, to me, is really striking and bewildering. My first exposure to the Japanese internment camp was the house we were living in, which was a Japanese barrack. After the Japanese left, they pretty much split the barracks up and gave them to the people that were here as housing. My first experience was the Japanese that, why do all our houses look the same and who built them? And then I was told, these are Japanese barracks. I heard from my folks and my grandfolks and people of the tribe that are older, the elders, was that they didn't like to see the people suffer that way, and that they didn't like to see so many people here that weren't originally from here. And because these were men, women, and children, they didn't understand it. They knew it wasn't right, but they had no idea what to do about it. They had no power to do anything about it. The infrastructure that was started here through the Japanese being here has allowed us to grow, I think, more rapidly than some other tribes. Our infrastructure was entirely built almost by the government and the Japanese people.
It's their labor that was used to subjugate and reclaim all of the land. It was their labor that creates a base in which then other populations like the later Navajo and Hopi come in and build upon.
If you come here now, you never knew there were 17,000 Japanese here. They built the schools here. They built the roads here. They developed some acreage into fields here. They brought the power down the center of the reservation. So up until that time, we as Native people were without running water, restroom facilities, without electricity. From their suffering, we gained a lot. And we never appreciated it because we didn't know about it.
Out of their tragedy, we benefited to a great extent. And I would hope that they would know that their suffering alleviated, poverty and other things here on this reservation.
And I guess, in retrospect, how do I feel about it? I feel bad about it. They suffered from being here. To think about the suffering people had to go through, I think that's the world. So that's about as much as I think about it.
The process of looking at things historically, it helped me greatly in terms of getting beyond just my own personal small world. It's about groups of people and how the government has treated these groups of people. Recognizing that bigger picture, I think, sort of diffused some of that anger. For me personally, it was one minority group helping another minority group. If we just erase the government away from it.
Well, I don't know how long it took me to forgive, but I did. I got it out of my system. Being a Christian, I know unless you forgive, you're never going to be a happy person. So you forgive. If I didn't forgive, I'd have that in my heart. You believe in the Lord, and it's hard to explain, faith. You believe in God, and God will take care of you. God will feed you. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. And if you believe in that, you will go to heaven.
There's a flock of mallard ducks out there, and one of them is a white duck, but he's living with the mallard ducks. I think he's trying to become one of them. But he can't see himself, but the other mallard duck could see him as being white, and they try to pick on him, try to ostracize him, like they tried to ostracize me. And they just don't want him in that group. If you could see himself as a whole, if you could see his face, his beak and all that stuff, he might think, well, I better get out of here, because I don't fit here. And that's me. I don't think I fit here. That's the tragedy of my life.
I think our parents did the most courageous, the most right thing to do, regardless of what the youngsters might say, you know. And we came out of there fairly unscathed. If we had opposed or fought the executive order, we would have been in a lot of trouble. We would have destroyed part of ourselves and part of other people. My father used to say, and I say it myself, yoku yatta monda, he would say, meaning we did all right. We've come through all this and come through triumphant.
I think the quest that I was on was typical of any individual who's trying to find out where they came from or who they are and how do they fit in. When I drive onto the reservation, there is a feeling like I've come home. I feel relieved and happy that I could go back there and not feel that rage I was feeling. When I go to Camp 3, it's like, this was my home. I kind of look over at Moon Mountain. I remember this place. It's like anyone else who goes back to their home. Poston identified who I was, who I am. That experience of Poston put me on a journey to try to help me understand my place here in this country.